See, next question? No, I have one. So, thinking about a lot of this discussion, we're talking about convincing, different smart companies to choose open source. So once we get there and they've chosen, how do they navigate and prioritize that whole transition from where they are to sort of more of an open source platform? So what is that path? Talk about that, or is that too complicated of a question?
Chris, I know you've experienced with this. You've been living that for.
Is that not something we want to talk about in public?
So the path has been pretty simple. I mean, I started out in my days at Intel, and we were probably one of the first largest implementations of Linux. And we tried taking our engineering, our chip development software, and moving it from Unix to an x86-based platform off of a RISC base. And it was very challenging. We tried another platform, Windows, for a couple of years, but it proved very difficult, and we ended up trying to make Unix on Windows. But what we found, it was very easy to take an application from Unix and move it to Linux. And so that's why Red Hat and Intel saw a lot of success early on, was because it was so easy to move that application from one platform to another. And nowadays, so consuming open source was a very natural, easy, and it had a lot of cost drivers too around the x86 platform. So, so the migration, I would say, was very as is. Java, certainly a lot of those applications were easy to migrate from Unix to Linux, just because of the open standards around the J2E spec as well.
Cool.
So,
Ed?
So the way we see those migrations or companies moving towards open source, most of them, particularly in the database sector, they start out with new projects, really wanting to use new technology until they gain confidence in what they have in open source. And of course, we all know that the central database is the most important piece of software there is, because that's where your business data is, right? That's probably the last piece they do migrate. So they start on the outside and then figure. Most of them migrate first in the more internal range, like the DevOps stuff, like monitoring, configuration management, and so on, before they go to the real customer-facing systems. But once they gain the confidence, it's more and more and faster they migrate, because they simply see the advantages.
Cool.
Yeah.
Ed?
Yeah, no, I agree with what both Chris and Michael have said, and I come back to something my brother Keith, who's our chief marketing officer, often says, this kind of crawl, walk, run approach, which, is, I think, embodied in what's been said. It's rare that we see successful companies kind of start with an enterprise-wide, mission-critical initiative as part of that, as that kind of on-ramp and part of that journey. That I think in most successful cases, they actually turns into a project that takes, is taken down in stages, and I think Michael described it well.
And I don't think it's the adoption curve is unique to open source. Probably similar to the adoption of virtualization, and now you're seeing the adoption of containers. They're not taking their critical application and moving it wholesale over. It's the new projects, or it's the less important ones, and as they gain that confidence, they are migrating more and more workloads over, whether it was virtualization in the past, now containers, which is certainly driven by open source.
Yeah, I just want to add too, and I think there's in this topic area, I think there's a little bit of a, kind of, I'll call it a danger zone in the database category right now, because I think in order to pull the strategy off successfully from an enterprise point of view, you actually have to have vendors who are committed over time. I mean, and in this crawl, walk, run thing, this is why endurance and durability counts from the vendor side, because projects start small, but they involve a heavy amount of investment in pre-sales work and in kind of pre-engineering work. That even the cost of just sales and marketing to kind of create awareness. And we're all built on subscription models, which means revenue kind of flows ratably over the life of the agreement. So now you start with small projects and revenue that accrues kind of over months. So you get a real economic dilemma. And I think we're fortunate. We've had 27 consecutive quarters of subscription revenue growth. And that actually enables us to invest in relationships that we understand take sometimes 1, 2, and 3 years of gestation before they get really mature. And I think in the database category, there's more risk because you see more companies have gotten insane valuations, which means they got a pile of dough put on them, and they got to live into those valuations while dealing with a very natural reality of crawl, walk, run. And I think sometimes those things come into conflict. And the way that shows up is you got to do more, and you got to do more now when companies aren't totally ready to do that. Or it comes out as, no, we don't just work here, we work everywhere, we can do it all. And this was part of my commentary yesterday. And I believe strongly that's creating confusion for where technology, open source technologies really fit, particularly in and around database.